Hi, I'm Martin Jarvis, and once again I want to welcome you to another perspective. Gosh, we have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the black community. And it used to be, when I talk about the black community, I was talking about the black community within the United States. But now, because of the recent exposure we've all had to each other, intense exposure, the black community is the world at large, the black community in the world, because we are so connected with the internet. You can look at me, I'm sitting in my den right now. We can see each other and see what we're doing. So we are connected. This is the black community of today. And we have to realize that. And so what started off, at least for me, I became aware of the black Scot TikTok trend, which was, I guess, about a week and a half ago, at least for me it was. And it was a wonderful thing, and people were really responding positively. But then it didn't take long before the ridicule came, and some of the black Scots were like, how stupid it was for Americans not to know that Scots exist, and all that kind of stuff. And that really wasn't the case. It was like we know, but we just weren't cognizant. We weren't thinking about, because we think about what comes before our face, what we see on social media. We think about these things. But then when something pops up, it's like, oh yeah, there's a warm feeling. And so still, it was good, but there were still folks sowing division even in that. And now I've noticed over this past week and a half, there's a lot of chaos going on within the black community. And I'm talking about the black world community. We have to begin seeing ourselves like that, okay? And that's why when I talk about Africa, when I talk about recognizing our origin as Africa, it's not the Africa of today. It's not the countries in the continent of Africa that were carved up and named by white Europeans. It's not those countries. It's not the Africans today in Africa who are the recipients of mental scars from the colonization that went on for so many years in Africa. That was a despicable thing, and there are scars. Now see, unlike the slave trade in the Americas, there wasn't the obvious torture and rapes and dismemberment and stealing of children and just whatever the most heinous thing you could think of, that was done to the Africans that were brought to America. And so we all have our experiences. But what we have to recognize is that we are not each other's enemy. We were stolen from a land, and others were occupied in the land and made subhuman, made second-class citizens. And so we got to recognize that a lot has happened to black people since the European invasion of the African continent. Okay, that's what we're talking about. And we were divided. And there was an intentional division. I'm not too sure about what happened on the African continent during colonialization, but I can tell you without a doubt that they mixed the Africans up with different tongues, and they wouldn't allow the Africans even to speak in their own language. So there was no communication, because the intent was if there is no language, it's easier to divide the people, okay? And so what I'm suggesting is we need to recognize it took hundreds of years to bring us to this place where we are today, where we are free. We are free in America. We're free in Africa. We're free all over the world for the most part. But we're free, physical freedom, but we're still suffering from mental bondage, okay? And the fact that we are against each other, the English are against the Americans, or the Africans, some Africans are against the Americans, and English are against the Scottish, and we got all this stuff going on. And I think the problem is that we have been brainwashed so well, we think of ourselves as the enemy. I see no talk in any of these battles between blacks, from across the oceans, these international conflicts we have between blacks. I hear no mention of white people. No mention at all. And they're the ones that created this mess. So whatever ills we have, let's go back to the source and recognize who the real culprit is. It's not us. We're victims of that mess. We were just victims that went in different directions. Some stayed, some went, but we were all continuous victims for hundreds of years. Recognize that. And so we have to stop blaming each other. We have to stop labeling. Now let me tell you how stupid we've gotten. And I'm sorry, but this is the way I see it. A little bit aggravated today, I guess. Is that saying a black English person could say this is what's wrong with black Americans. Or say a black American person could say this is what's wrong with black Africans. Or a black Scottish person could say this is what's wrong with black English people. Okay, we have to, that right there from any of us is a sign of our ignorance and a sign of our brainwashing. Because we have to know, if we have a sensible and adult mind, that you cannot generalize an entire nation and say this is how they are. So no, I can't say this is how black Africans are. I can't say this is how black English people are, or this is how black Scottish people, or this is how black Americans are. Because we're all individual human beings. Look, even in your own families, even in our own families, everybody's not the same. My brother, I have a family of 4 siblings and 2 parents. Okay, some of them aren't here, but when they were here, when we were all here, that we didn't all think the same. We had serious discussions and debates and even arguments because we thought differently. And that was just in my unit of 7 people in my family. And you know the same thing. You're not the same as your brother or your sister or your uncle or your aunt. You know you have disagreements with them. So if you know that all of your family, they don't think the same, why in the world would you look at all black Americans or all black English people or all black Africans or all black anybody and believe this is what they think. This is how they feel. That's ridiculous. That's a trick of our enemy, which is so transparent we shouldn't be foolish enough to fall into it. We're on the same page, and there is strength in unity. Now look, the reality, and so we all have reasons, I suppose, that justify our feelings, but our feelings cannot trump logic. Okay, it is illogical to believe that all of the black population of a particular country believe like this. And if that's the fuel for your argument, you're creating what's called, a straw man argument, where you've created something that doesn't exist, and that's what you're arguing about. That's not who we are. Okay, I'm telling you, man. Even let's take the black Americans for example, because the problem that black people have had on this planet is that we've been too trusting. Okay, so what we had. We really need to realize that black people in Africa, and this is pre-European invasion. The Africa today the mentality of Africans today is victim to the colonization that their ancestors had to suffer through. The black people in America today, we are victims to the slavery that our ancestors had to go through. So that's a reality. But we need to shake this stuff off. We need to recognize that all that stuff was a lie. All the stuff we bought into about ourselves, that we were second-class citizens or we were not as good as those and all that stuff, we have to shake that off. All these conversations ragging on other black folks from other nations when the real culprit is just sitting back watching us fight it out like gladiators. Watching us fight our own people. Saying, look, we did a great job. They're never going to come together. They're all at each other's throats. And we're the ones who started it. That's what we're doing, man. That's what we're jacked up. And we have to shake this. Because there's power in unity. Let me give you an example. We had back in the 60s, in Alabama, in Montgomery, Alabama, what was a bus boycott. And what that was they had the buses, going through, taking people to work, taking people to jobs, taking people wherever they needed to go every day. And it was a lucrative business, the buses. People needed transportation. But the one thing about the Alabama system, it was segregated. And black people could ride the bus, but black people had to sit way in the back. White people could sit up front. That was the law. That was the rule. And even if the bus was empty and there were no white people on it, the black people still had to go sit at the back of the bus. That's where that phrase, sitting at the back of the bus, comes from, okay? And it was terrible and it was humiliating. So if the black or the colored part of the bus was full, and the white part of the bus was empty, and you had people, black people, still coming on that bus. They just had to stand up, although all of the seats up front were empty. That's the situation. And there were all kinds of situations. Black people couldn't eat here. Black people couldn't go there. It was a terrible situation. This was after slavery. This was during the Civil Rights Movement. This was 100 years after slavery was over. This was still going on. Okay? But see, what black people learned over the years, even through slavery and up after slavery and all, we learned how to fight. We learned that we couldn't just take up arms and fight them. We'd just be decimated. There was no way we'd win that. But we had to figure out how to fight, and that's what we did. And we recognized that the most powerful tool in this country today is money. It's money. That's the weapon, okay? So what happened with the bus? Black people finally got tired of all that sitting in the back of the bus stuff. They came together and decided, we're just not going to ride the bus anymore. Oh yeah, sure, it was an inconvenience, but they stopped riding that bus. That bus lost over half of its revenue. A lot of the white people had cars. The primary people that utilized those buses were black people. And it took only about a week before that bus company was beginning to go out of business, because black people unified. Now, see, they could have said, well, we're not going to take the bus, and then maybe 20 black people said, oh, I'm just going to take the bus because I need to get to work. No, they all stopped taking that bus. They unified. They unified their resources. They unified their money, and then we're not putting our money into this bus company anymore. And the bus company was folding. It was going under. Finally, they came out. They changed that rule. Black people could sit anywhere they wanted to sit as a result of black people being unified and recognizing the power they had. They can direct just this bus company today. We could target the taxi company. We could target the theater. We could target the store. We could target that restaurant over there. If we are unified, we'll win this thing. But as long as we're divided, we're not. And this is a community now of black people. It's the worldwide community. And we have to be unified. We can't simply settle for this. What I'm suggesting today, I see this as almost like a divine time. This is a moment. This is like 400 and some years since the first slaves came to America. This is 400 and some years since the exploitation of Africa began. Now let me tell you how that exploitation began, just so we can understand it. Because we really, really, really need to understand who the enemy is and who the enemy is not. Okay? Black people are not the enemy. I don't care what you think in your mind, or what you feel they've done that's offensive, or what you think they all believe and all that. That's garbage. You need to clear that garbage out of your mind. That's garbage placed there by the perpetrators of this illness that we're still all suffering with this many years later. We are not each other's enemy. And if you think you are, then you have garbage in your brain, and it has to be removed. Now I'm not saying we're not going to have people out there that have ulterior motives, okay? A lot of times we come up with this stuff, like FBA, somehow to differentiate ourselves from other black people. I had never even heard of that until about 2 weeks ago. And then I'm like, this is ridiculous. And so some of the folks were challenging me on my YouTube channel. And so my response was, give me the benefits of FBA to the black community. There is no benefits. You know what the FBA is? Because I listened to it today because I was intent. And the gentleman that sort of like coined that phrase and is really behind this, I really revere this guy. I think he has a lot of knowledge. But just because you have the knowledge, you may not know how to use it. Sometimes knowledge is just good to have the knowledge of, so you can be aware of certain things. But if black people in America think that differentiating themselves from black immigrants that come here mean that they're going to get something, this is another foolish attitude. Why in the world would any black person in America think white folks are going to give them anything? Okay? The only strength that black people will have in this nation, more than what we have, because we have money, is unifying with the more blacks that are coming into this nation. It's not separating ourselves. It's not segregating ourselves. There is no value in that, okay? And so this is, again, another trick of the enemy of us to divide us any way they can. No, we should not be divided. We have to be unified, man. And that's it. But as I was sharing, we've just always been historically trusting. I'm going to try to settle down now and just talk. We've always been historically trusting as black people. Now look, when the white folks, the Europeans, came to Africa initially, the continent of Africa, and with had certain kingdoms, many kingdoms within it, but not all these countries that they carved up and wrote up for their own exploitive purposes, is that they came in peace. They came in peace, and they recognized the great civilization. They recognized the great resources. They recognized how great Africa was in so many resources. Okay, and the people were civilized. The people were civilized, and so they came as friends. They came trading. They had never seen pepper before, believe it or not. And that's for the seasoning, because they still not quite using that seasoning right, okay? But I'm just saying, they came in peace and they were trading. Africa was trading with China, with India. Africa was civilized. And trade partners all over the world. And so these Europeans came, in peace. But I don't know if they came with the idea of flipping the script, but eventually it flipped. Because we're so trusting. That slave trade would have never happened from Africans being stolen from Africa if Africans hadn't helped the Europeans do this. Hadn't traded Africans, for goods, for money, for things that were of value. Because we're trusting. And so what you have here, this is a brief history lesson. These Europeans came, and first thing they did, after trading and gaining favor and gaining friendship, they began to merchandise black people, and using other black people to capture black people, however necessary, and to sell them and trade them to these white Europeans. And these blacks would become the slaves in the New World, okay? But what I want to share with you is these were trusting black people, just doing what they do, trade. The white Europeans were exploiting the black people out of Africa, okay? And so after they finished and continued exploiting the Africans out of Africa, what did they begin doing? Then they began turning on those that had befriended them and began exploiting them. Because Africans may have been civilized, but they didn't have the weapons that the Europeans had. They didn't have the sheer brutality of the Europeans. And so in time, the Africans were taken into bondage. The Africans were controlled by the white Europeans. Africa was carved up, given to the Germans, given to the French, given to the British. This is what they did because we were so trusting, giving them our people, black people. And all of a sudden, once they had their fill of black people and recognized they had a continuous stream of black people, they began to colonize Africa with a different kind of oppression, with a different kind of slavery. Maybe slavery light, I don't know. And so then you're talking about hundreds of years of exploiting. That the Europeans have taken every ounce of resource out of Africa. Now that brother from Burkina Faso, this guy, he sees. And he's a relatively young man as well, compared to me, that is. And so that's the focus. The focus isn't other black people. The only time focus is other black people is when the other black people are working for those who would choose to oppress or exploit black people in our community. When I say our community, our world community. And so in order to fight that, we have to be unified. We can't be holding on to these petty grudges, these petty issues that we have. All the black Americans this, the black English that, the black Scottish, the black Africans. We can't be doing that. We have to recognize that was a trick of our enemy to divide us and to keep us divided. Just so when we and what helps is and so I'm not just saying this. What helps is when I consider our origin Africa. Our origin is before the Europeans came. It's not current Africa. And see, even with these FBA, Foundational Black Americans, in their mind, whatever they think is justified, no, we're not starting at slavery in America. Black people didn't start as slaves. So why would we focus on that? Black people didn't start being colonized. That's not where black people started. So why would we focus on that? Black people didn't start in England. Black people didn't start in Scotland. Black people didn't start in America or in Italy or in Germany or in Japan or in China or Vietnam or any of these places. Black people, the origin is Africa. And so our focus is not Africa of today with all the countries that were created and named by Europeans. Come on now, that's part of the colonized mindset. The Africa that we have, that our commonality that we have, that we are joined by, is Africa before the European invasion. And that trumps the colonization. That trumps the slavery. That trumps the slavery, the FBA. That trumps whatever nations we belong to. Now, I'm not coming against the nations that we belong to and saying we need to give up our citizenship. No, I'm cool being an American, cool being Scottish, cool being England, cool being African from whatever country within the continent of Africa. If you're cool with whatever you are, it's good. But just recognize that you have a common bond with every black person on this planet. And recognize that whatever nation black people are living in, outside of Africa, we are the minority. And we really don't have power. The only power that black people have in the West is the power that's been given. The power that's been offered. Here, you can have some power, black person. You can have this. You can, and we enjoy that. And we may have enjoyed it all of our lives or all of our parents' lives, whatever. But the reality is whatever is being given to you can just as easily be taken away from you. So don't be so confident in the cushy lifestyle of wherever we live. I'm in America. Don't be so confident. I mean, I have a good life. But I also keep an assault rifle, a shotgun, and a 9mm Glock that I've never had to use. But I'm not foolish enough to believe that just because something has been offered and it's been easy that someone might not attempt to take it away. I have cars that are paid for. I have an extra home just in case. I have things. I'm prepared. And all I'm saying, part of that preparation will come in unity with all of us because we all have something to bring to the table. And when I say bring to the table, I don't mean money or our resources. Here, you send me this and you send me. No, we have enough grifters out there. We have a lot of grifters out there just wanting your money that will talk the right talk. A lot of people call themselves doctors. A lot of people calling themselves pastors and preachers and evangelists. We have politicians and presidents. We have mayors. We have a lot of folks out there talking the right words because they know how easily we trust. But they're not talking the words of unity because they recognize if we unify, that they lose some of their power. Okay? So I'm just suggesting that we need to drop all these battles, man. I spend my time now. First, when that black TikTok Scottish thing start trending, man, I'm loving it, enjoying the conversations, liking this and loving that and loving this and following. Now I find myself on TikTok trying to defend, trying to get people to come out of this hate this other black person mindset. And you know what they do? And I say they, I mean they on all the sides. They'll say, they'll bring up what's wrong with them, and that justifies a negative feeling coming from me. That's what they're doing. Whether it's Africans to Americans, or Americans to Africans, or Americans to English, English to Scottish, English to Americans. However it goes, you find people ragging on a particular entire nation's culture of black people justify, and then begin ragging on them themselves. It's all a trick, man. It's what we call the straw man. You set up an argument, set up something that really didn't exist, and then be bashing it, then be arguing against it. That's not us. There is so much power that we have. Now, as I shared with you the Montgomery boycott, that bus boycott, imagine if we were able to unify as black people on this planet. This community, the world community of black people. And so if the world community of English blacks weren't mad at American blacks, American blacks weren't mad at African blacks, African blacks weren't mad at American blacks, or Scottish blacks, or Italian, or Irish, or wherever, everyone. What if we were all on the same page? What if instead of coming against our differences, we embraced our differences? What if instead of when someone doesn't understand something that we understood, that we don't ridicule them because we recognize that I'm sure they understand some things that we don't understand? There's a humility and a good sense and a logic involved in that. We have to start building this. We have to start picking up the pieces and recognize what happened to us in the original Africa pre the European invasion was we were all unified in the same place. I know we had petty battles between kingdoms, within Africa. That's not what I'm talking about. But as a people, like the white people. Look, you had, historically, you had the Goths and the Visigoths, you had the Vikings, you had the French fighting the British, and fighting the Scottish, and fighting the Irish, and all these white folks were fighting each other. But still, look at them today. You see how they respond. When push comes to shove, they're unified. When it comes to facing people that don't look like them, but we don't seem to be able to do that. Because this is the world in which we exist. We've grown accustomed to being the second-class citizen. We've been accustomed to being the marginalized people. We've been accustomed to be the oppressed people. And here, give a little bit of this, give a little bit of room, give you a little bit of air to breathe, and now we're okay, although it's not enough air to be healthy, but it's enough air to survive, and we're just thankful for that. No, man. Man, this is a particular time in history. What I'm telling you right now, this is the opportunity that could be the time in history that historians later will look back on and say, this is when black people unified. This is when black people found each other. We all knew we were here, but this is when black people found each other and began communicating with each other, began unifying with each other, built up to, man, we could be running this world, man, I'm telling you. We could. We are that. Look, whenever we put our hand to do something significant, we accomplish it. And so what I'm afraid of, and what I'm about to say, I've been into, I understand the drug situation, the alcohol situation, the partying situation, the music situation, the fashion, and all this stuff that we buy into. All these things are keeping us from attaining significant goals. Man, I'm telling you, I used to get that buzz. I used to drink alcohol. I'd be out in the clubs every night of the week. I was cool back in the day. But what does that get you? The coolness. When the smoke clears and the dust settles, you're not improved. And neither is the situation of your family, and neither is the situation of black people. We need to wise up. We need to come together. And I hope you... if everyone could just save this and just look at it every once in a while and recognize that person I'm hating in England, that person I'm hating, in various nations in Africa, that person I'm hating in America, that person I'm hating in Scotland, that is truly my brother. For real. Look. And maybe it's because I have a black American mentality about that. Because when the black folks, when the Africans were brought to this land, this new world, there were from many kingdoms, many tongues, many languages. And then they're all just, okay, now here, how do we survive together? As a black American, our situation was unique. Just as, black Africans, your situation was unique. But ours, we had to fight for everything that we've gotten. We died. Look, 100% of the slave revolts people not going to be slaves fighting back, they were destroyed. And you know why? And every single time an African told. Now, we're all Africans at the time, so when I say African, I mean one of us told. Okay? But still, slavery was not an option. So what you have to realize is, even in that first 200 years, your people are taken out of a civilized environment, continent of Africa, split up and divided up, put into slavery, tortured, killed, murdered, molested, raped, their children, their wives in front of them. They had to learn the language. That was the most important aspect for particular slaves in order to survive, in order to know what was going on, in order to figure out a game plan. You had to understand the language and know how these people thought, okay? And so out of all that, this is who we are today as a result of that situation, okay? And so we don't just, we shouldn't take charity. And so we have a lot of people on what they call the welfare system. But in their minds, they're not taking charity. They're simply taking whatever is available, okay? And so they're still utilizing the take what's yours, but they're limiting themselves by simply taking and being satisfied with government handouts. I'm saying that we all over the world as black people are living far beneath where we should, considering the civilization of our ancestors in Africa pre the European invasion. And we need to come back together. This would be so simple. This community of black people internationally would be so simple, but we have so much division. So much division between us. That has to stop. Man, I was so thrilled, the whole Black Scott TikTok thing and how happy everybody was to find long-lost cousins, and that's what we really are. If you really think about it, we all came from that same origin, the Africa before the Europeans came. We all came from there. I don't care if you were taken in slaves, or if you were simply stayed there and you were colonized, or if you were folks that fed up with that, I'm moving, and just migrated out and ended up in Scotland or ended up, wherever. However, or maybe there were marauding, armies that you were part of that ended up in Italy or something and stayed there or created kids and came up there. Whatever the situation that brought you to wherever you are, we are related. That's a reality. And so we just have to realize that. I won't know the family that you came out of and your grandparents and their grandparents, and you won't know mine, but we have to come to the point to realize that through no fault of our own, we were separated. And so we don't trace our origins back to modern day Africa, all those countries that were created by white people for the purpose of exploiting their resources. No, we bring our origin back pre-European invasion to that place where we came from, a civilized people, a civilized land. And you know this. You know what the Africa was before the Europeans came. Medicine and geometry and architecture and art and all the things that we were about. Imagine if the Europeans had never shown. This was 4,000, 5,000 years ago. This was the strength of Africa. All those things. Imagine if the Europeans had never shown up. What do you think? What would we be today? Man. I'm just saying this. Let's not worry about that so much as to consider reuniting, being as one. I have to think that if we could really go back and think about what the Africans were saying as they were truly being exploited taken off and shipped to other lands to be slaves, or colonized here, or even the ancestors that just left Africa to migrate. They left their homes because they could see something terrible was on the horizon. What would they want us to be about today? Would they want us arguing and bickering and all that stuff? No, man. They would recognize they were divided, they were split up, they were moved, they were taken, they were forced to do what they had to do. What would they want for us today, given the opportunity to reunite, to reconnect, to be in unity? I believe that's what they want. Let's try to honor those wishes. How's that? I guess I've been ranting and raving. I'm sorry, but man, this is so important. It is important that we recognize that we have given this important tool of social media and the internet, not just to make music videos and to dance around and do pranks on people. There's a powerful tool here that could reunite black people from a terrible tragedy that was perpetrated on our ancestors so long ago. Well, you kick that around, okay? See ya.